Hi everyone, this is Sandra from Mobius Girl Design. I'm back for part 2 of our tutorial video series for the Marguerite Blanket Crochet Along. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about the basics of the join as you go technique that I use for this blanket. So you can see here that I've finished my first full motif. Can't quite fit it all on the screen, so we'll just do a little twirl so you can see the whole thing. So this is my motif number 1. If you look at the diagram in the pattern, you'll see that each of the motifs is numbered from 1 through 18, and there are directions about in which order you're going to join them. I've had some questions about what to do if you don't want to join the motifs as you go, or rather if you want to be able to change around the color order a little bit. And my advice for that is to work up one full motif. I'm going to switch out another one here, another sample motif. So you're going to work up one full motif. Don't fasten off the ends because you're going to be frogging back a little bit. So on this motif here, you can see my start point for round 11, which is right here. I've gone ahead and I've worked around all the way on the last round until I come to this point where, as it says in the pattern, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas between points that are unworked. So what I did for this one was I actually made I made a full motif, and then I frogged back, I cut my yarn, frogged back until I was at this point where there were 5 empty spaces left, or 5 unworked areas between points. And then after that, all I have to do to make sure that I have enough yarn is to measure. And there's the complete way of doing that with measuring tape, or you can do sort of the cheater way, which is to take both colors A and B, what you have left. I just sort of wrap it around my hand and count the number of wraps. So that would be 1 wrap, 2 wraps, 3 wraps, 4, and I can see that when I get back down to this over here, to where I finished, it's just a little bit more than 5 wraps. And sometimes I do just a little bit extra to make sure that I'm not shorting myself on yarn. I'm going to do the same thing for my color B, which I already did here, and this was about 25 wraps. And then I know I have enough yarn to finish off my motifs, so then I can take sort of my almost finished motifs and move them around in whatever order that I want in the blanket. So I've done that, and now I'm ready to join my first 2 motifs. So you'll see in the pattern that for motif number 2, I tell you to work it all the way up until you're at sort of this last area here. I'm just going to go ahead and join from here because then this will be more applicable for some of the later motifs also. The motifs will be joined on a different number of sides, as I call them, or a different number of areas between points, and that depends on where in the blanket they're placed. So for joining the first 2 motifs, all I need is to join them in 1 area. So basically what I'm going to do is work my motif up until the point where I'm ready to do my color change for this area right here. So here on my hook, I'm going to work this last stitch, make my last point here, and switch my color. And now I'm ready to start joining in my color A, which is right here, the pink for this one. So joining is all about working stitches together, working motifs together. I'm going to work a stitch, drop the loop from the hook, and insert into the next motif. This is what that looks like. So as I'm working, I'm going to make sure that I'm keeping my carry yarn on top of or a little bit behind my work. And now that I'm at this point where I've completed my last point before joining, I'm going to drop the loop off my hook, right? And I'm going to go ahead and shift this a little bit so that it's at a better angle for me. I tend to like to join kind of in this order. And it doesn't matter where on here I join, so long as I'm joining up this area in between points with this area in between points. There's not going to be any joining stitches at this stage for the points themselves. Those will be joined up later with the triangles. So I've dropped my loop. I'm going to find the stitch on the corresponding motif, which is this first stitch after the point. I'm going to insert my hook from, this is the front of the piece, this is the back. So I'm going to insert it from front to back under both loops of that first stitch. With my hook through both loops, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to pick up this loop. Just put it on my hook. I like to pull it taut here a little bit. Let me move my yarn around, again, so I'm at a good angle. So I'm going to pick up my loop, try to carry it taut. Again, I've got my carry yarn along the top of the motif. I'm going to go ahead and just pull this loop through this motif on the side. So now this is where the join starts to happen. I'm going to make my first stitch in my pink motif here. I'll work it all the way to the end, just like normal, okay? This is a little bit loose. If you end up pulling too much of a loop here, you're going to end up with kind of a loose join. So that's why you want to make sure that this is right up against the point from the last repetition, the last repeat. So again, I'm going to make my first stitch, keeping my tension as much as I can. And then I like to pull it up a little bit just to give myself some slack so I don't lose the loop. I'm going to drop it off the hook, move this out of the way, and I'm going to go now to my next stitch on my adjacent motif, which is the one that is right here. Again, I'm going to go from front to back, insert my hook under both loops, place this loop back on top, my working loop, pull tight, and now I'm going to pull that loop through. I'm going to go ahead and make my next stitch, and in the pattern this one goes in the same stitch as before, just like that. I'm going to continue on in that way. So after every stitch on the pink motif, I drop the loop, find the next open loop on my adjacent motif, insert my hook, put the loop back on, and pull through. And as I keep working, I try to, again, keep the motifs as close to each other as possible so my stitches don't get pulled out of shape. And as I go, this lovely little sort of braid starts to form between the two motifs. Altogether, I will be joining 10 stitches in a row, which is the length of the area between 2 points. So I'm just gonna finish this up and show you how this looks when I get to the end. And as I'm moving here, I'm still working with my carry yarn, so I still need to make sure that that's somewhat tight. Try to keep tension on my working yarn, keep my motifs close. I'll work my next stitch. Getting a little tangled over here, so let me do some untangling. Gonna keep going, just a few more stitches here. And then I will be at the end. And like I said before, the number of sides that you are joining each motif on depends on where in the blanket it goes. Some motifs will be only joined on one side, some will be joined on 2, and some will be joined on 3. But 3 sides is the maximum number of sides that you'll have to join any of your motifs. So here I am on now my last stitch before my next sort of petal. And remember that 2 stitches go into here. I'm going to make 1, drop my loop, and you can see now that I've pulled through on the very last loop of color A on my blue motif before the point. I'm going to make my last stitch, again stopping before I get all the way done, because now I'm ready in my pattern for the motif to change colors. So I'm going to pick up my new color, finish off that stitch, and keep going. So if I were going to be attaching this motif to another one in the blanket, what I would do is to just keep working in the pattern. So I would go through, and I'm going to need to switch my yarn here again, and keep working into the next area. You'll notice that I'm not joining anymore to this first motif. I'm just working forward in the pattern. Putting 2 stitches into the first double crochet, and then continuing on just like normal. When I get to the end of this area, if I were ready to join it to another motif, it would be in the area between the next 2 points. So after I get all the way over here, put my 2 stitches in the end and change colors. Again, I'm going to work the next point, and in the pattern you'll see that I skip this stitch and work into the next one. Now when I'm ready to change colors again, this will be the point at which I am ready to join another motif. So if I had another one that was right here, this would be the area where I was joining it. So on each motif, there's going to be a joining point. Again, you can see that none of the points here are joined together. There's going to be a part that's worked without being joined to anything. And then I'll continue on, and my next join space would be right here. This empty space is where the filler triangles are going to go in the next step of the pattern when we're done with all of the motifs. So that's the basics of how to do the join as you go technique for the full motifs. The technique is the same for the half motifs and the quarter motifs. It's just the number of sides, or areas as I call them in the pattern, that are joined differently. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments or to send me an email. Again, you can also join into the Facebook Crochet Along group, which is just my Facebook closed group. It's called Mobius Girl Crochet Nation. Or you can check out the Crochet Along hosted on Julie Yeager's forum on Ravelry. I will include links to those in the description below, and we should be all set to go for the next video. Until then, happy hooking. Bye.